waiting any longer. Good evening, everybody. I'm Joan McIntyre, Vice Chair of the Climate Change, Energy and Environment Commission, sitting in for Cindy, who is off traveling this month. We'll start with kind of introductions. And if there's anybody online who wants to make on, let us know as we go around, but we'll go around the room first.
Thank you, Joan. Eric Gibbs, Commissioner.
Jenna Peabody, Air Team.
Mark Greenwood, Commissioner.
I am Doug Snowden-Boss, Commissioner.
Matt, Commissioner.
Elizabeth Whitney, Commissioner.
Jonathan Morgenstein, Commissioner.
Online.
Demetra.
No, I was going to let Manchi go first.
Majdi Shamali, Commissioner.
Demetra McBride, Arlington County.
Paul Snodgrass, resident.
I'm Jen Hazen, I'm also a resident.
Great. Welcome, everybody. Actually, looks like I think we have a quorum. So I guess we can jump right into the transportation master plan. Pardon?
Are there any public comments?
Oh, I didn't hear anybody say. Anybody have public comments?
Better call.
Okay, on to our first agenda item. It's all yours, Demetra. Thanks for giving us this presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully there'll be some, I'm going to be brisk and leave time for Q&A. If people want to interrupt while I'm giving the presentation, please don't hesitate. This is the kind of pre-launch review of the carbon neutral transportation master plan for stakeholders, starting with C2E2, of course. Next. Very quickly, I'm just going to take you through a little bit of the background. I know you've heard this before, but just as a refresher, and then a little bit about the development process with some examples, tangible examples. Then to look at the core goals, objectives, and the key initiatives that were identified under the plan, the proposed budget initiatives that are tied to the CNTMP. And it's not just that it's informed budget initiatives, but also other actions. And then, of course, our next steps, which are going to include within the next couple of weeks, we're going to try and get a final of a 5-year action program. Because as you know, we're not just about planning, but about the actual physical implementation and holding the county accountable and reportable for these actions. Jenna, if you can go down to the next one. I don't know, something happened here in this formatting. But starting off with the background, this headline carries over into this graphic that follows below. This is certainly not exhaustive of all of the transportation-related activities or benchmarks or milestones for the county, but I just wanted to point out a couple of them. In 2000, the county conducted its first comprehensive greenhouse gas inventory. In 2010, this is very important. The word launched is here. So when you see the county's first community energy plan, that process was launched in 2010. In 2013, was a milestone year. They adopted the first CEP, the Community Energy Plan. ART completed converting its formerly diesel transit bus fleet to compressed natural gas in 2013. And then AIR was reconstituted as the Arlington Initiative to Rethink Energy, formally in 2013 as well. That was updated, the CEP, in 2019, as C2E2 knows, because it was very deeply involved in this, is there was a complete overhaul of the implementation framework of the CEP and the first launch of the first cycle for the first 2 years, 2021 and 2022 and 2023 calendar years of the roadmap. and we're currently in the beginning of a 3-year cycle for 24, 25, and 26. And then, of course, there's milestones here for APS, and then, of course, 1923 and 24, the launch of the Carbon Neutral Transportation Master Plan, which was a core primary action under the first CEP roadmap. Next, please. So just to put this in perspective, because it does get a little confusing just to look at them independently, is there are top-level policy documents for transportation or that deal or have a section in transportation. So you've got your master transportation plan, obviously, and the community energy plan has a dedicated chapter or part of its portfolio is for transportation, as you know. And then there are these supportive implementation frameworks and operationalization plans underneath that roll up into these grander policy documents. I like to think that really that bottom level is actually, no pun intended, where the rubber meets the road, and this is where things get done. And that's the ARTBUS Zero Emissions ZEB. Oops, John Bloom. Okay, well, welcome, John. Then the Transit Strategic Plan. This is a plan that is part of a mandate by the actual Commonwealth of Virginia that was recently adopted. And then, of course, the Carbon Neutral Transportation Master Plan. Next, please. I'm not going to read this, but just to go through just this grand development process. We did have a lot of formative workshops to shape the CNTMP goals. And those you're going to see, and I'm not going to give it away just yet, are the 3 main goals and core objectives of the plan. Then we went through a great deal of development. The consultant performed and produced a number of technical memoranda that I think are going to be of interest to some of you as well. We had workshops internally. We had also some outreach to key stakeholders, including the Energy Committee and C2E2. And then what we wanted to do was bring everybody together across all the departments. And this does include APS. We do have a section of the CNTMP that's dedicated totally towards schools and their fleet. But we did bring everybody together last October and November and really looked at, okay, what are going to be our core actions in implementing just to inform that 5-year action program. And now what we're starting is C2E2 is actually the first. We're going to be hopefully soon briefing the county manager. We have earlier spoken with the board back in the spring in 2x2s, as I'm probably going to raise for you some questions that we want to continue the dialogue with C2E2, is I think that there's been maybe a little bit of a sea shift in the public or in stakeholders about EVSE. So I'd like to discuss that a little bit in a little bit. Let's just move forward though. But you're going to see these next steps. And then of course, the next thing we're going to bring to you, I would probably say no later than September, is the 5-year action program. But you're going to see some of those actions already at play here. Next, please. And this was just part of the dedicated initiative to APS under the CNTMP, was a technical memorandum both on their bus fleet and the facilities, the decarbonization infrastructure. So there were 2 different, this is an overview of the Trade Center for those of you who are familiar with it. And there were 2 different scenarios for parking that were given there, and obviously to accommodate also the charging infrastructure. These 2 scenarios predated and they heavily informed the Trade Center optimization study. Next, please. We also did, and again, this isn't the total plan, but these are just examples of the detail in the process. So another technical memorandum goes into our method for EV site charger siting. And as you can see, we started mapping where there were already clusters of public chargers, which you can see in the map to the right. And then what we initially started out with were 3 different, what we called greater corridors, indicated by the green, the purple, and the orange color. And these are corridors where there's going to be concentrations. It's where, using the methodology that was developed on how and where we should map and site public use EVSE, is where there are transportation corridors. Where do we think there's going to be growth in either localized EV ownership or circulation of EV ownership in these areas? What are the traffic corridors, and what are the main origin and destination points in these areas? So there was a great deal of, kind of analytics and metrics that went behind the siting. And we did an actual drill down deep, which you're going to be able to see in one of the technical memoranda, study for the area in orange, and looked at where we might site specific charging infrastructure, not just in public spaces or government facilities that have public access for public use, but also we looked at the possibility of public-private partnerships. We did look at private areas and then other areas such as churches. Obviously, there's an equity link here. The one thing that you may be asking yourselves is, why is there not a corridor along Langston Boulevard? And it's a great question. And right now, what it is that the information that was available because of the intended plan, Langston Boulevard, and the comprehensiveness of the redevelopment that's planned there, is that right now it's too premature to tell exactly what is going to be the patterns of redevelopment, and to what extent we can ask developers to work with the county and work with the public in bringing EVSE onto their sites as well. So it isn't that we've neglected Plan Langston Boulevard or that long corridor that's almost 5 miles long. It's just that we do not have the data that was necessary to really do this kind of analytical mapping and siting exercise.
And how will these charging stations work? Meaning, who's paying for them? How much they cost? Are they renting real estate? How would it actually work?
Right now, what we have now, as some of you may already be aware of, is we have this interim rate ordinance that we adopted. It was never intended to really be in place for more than a year, 18 months. We're in the process of starting to talk about the permanent rate ordinance now. This would be on public sites, though, what we can control. Other than that, the market will control. So if you see something that's in a kind of mall that runs along, let's say, Columbia Pike, if there's charging infrastructure there and it's on private land, because they'll also presumably be somehow responsible for the power bill, they're going to be in charge, along with, it could be ChargePoint, it could be Bliss, it could be Blank, it could be a number of different vendors that they may use. It'll be the market. Right now, I can tell you that I think Fairfax just adopted an update to their rate ordinance, and I think, don't quote me, they went up from 28 cents to 32 cents per kilowatt hour on public facilities with public, on government facilities where there's public access and public use. I have no idea exactly, we're just starting out, we're early on in developing a proposal for the adoption of the permanent ordinance and not just an interim one. Ours was at 14.5 cents per kilowatt hour in the interim. We were looking just to really cost recovery in the program. And actually that hasn't happened. But what we got out of that, which was really important, was a number of different sites that we have been tracking the metrics on. So we do have a sense of, at least in those areas and at those sites, such as the Aquatic Center, what is the general usage, pattern of that charging infrastructure. We're probably going to be saying more about this soon. We just got the data and we're crunching it, but it looks like the actual use of those chargers is anywhere from 7% on up to 20%. And oddly enough, the national average for charging infrastructure in a public space for public use is generally, the high end is around 15 to 18%. So 20% is actually high. And not surprisingly, that area, those chargers are in the Farrington.
So the Dominion Power, like if I charge my car at home, is like 12 cents a kilowatt.
Yep.
So if Fairfax is at 28 or 32 cents, like, I mean, is this meant to be a profitable venture for Fairfax?
I am going to tell you that my guess is they are probably not making any profit, because the other thing is too, is that in homes, 99% of the time you're using a level 1 charger. That's what Dominion offers. So when you go into the public space, those are almost always level 2 chargers, unless they're DC fast chargers and they're level 3, which are very, very expensive. We're seeing those around the region. If you see DC fast chargers, level 3s, their rates are going as high as 70 cents per kilowatt hour in some places.
Is there any incentive for apartment buildings to include e-parking?
Existing ones?
I'm not gonna wanna charge my vehicle.
No. Existing ones?
Yes, existing. I'm not talking new buildings, like retrofitting.
We did last year in 2023 a very, very intense, direct kind of benchmarking exercise with a number of multifamily apartment buildings that were rentals and also condominium buildings here in Arlington. And I have to tell you, the simple answer to that question is I don't think there is, and it's only because of money. Fairfax has had an incentive program for up to $5,000 per building. And the buildings that we were talking to, these were buildings that also had electricians, electric contractors come out and do some schematics and do initial projections of what the cost would be. And depending on the building and the age of the building, it was anywhere from $110,000 to $245,000, $250,000 just to put in a handful of chargers. We're not talking about, making 10% of the parking garage with charging infrastructure or even EVs, EV ready. We're talking about 6 chargers. And it was just really expensive because, the buildings, you're talking about a building that never anticipated electric cars.
I mean, it's interesting because, Virginia Hospital Center has some chargers in the new parking garage. My office building in Ballston has chargers, and in my office building, they give you 4 hours for free. So somebody is paying the freight of that, right? And if the building doesn't have an incentive for it, then it's either just being factored into the parking cost or the building's eating it as a benefit.
Sometimes employers, if you've got a building that, has tenants in it and they've got, let's say, a dozen employers in that building, sometimes the employers in Arlington, it's not terribly common, but it's not uncommon to have businesses that have transportation incentive programs.
Do you have access to Fairfax County's calculation of 32 cents per kilowatt hour? Like how they came up with that number? I mean, it's way more than retail rates, but are they trying to subsidize other programs with extra revenue they'd get from that, and what their payback period was for the infrastructure investment?
We can certainly, well, let me put it to you this way. We're going to be talking to them anyway as we get deeper. We've just been trying to get beyond the operating budget and then the capital budget. But that is going to be something that we're going to be working on intensely. starting this summer, later this summer. So we are going to be talking to Fairfax and others. How much information they're going to feel comfortable giving us always remains to be seen. You know, some organizations just like to keep that information closer to the vest. Certainly anything that they've had to share with their own constituents, I'm sure they'll be happy to share with us.
Great, thank you.
Nathan, did
Yeah.
the study look at other areas, say around the country, and what they were doing to support private development, especially in these multifamily buildings and that? And the other thing is, to what extent in Virginia, or for us, is Dominion an issue in terms of kind of getting access to the power?
Well, you know, Joan, it's kind of interesting because just it seems like a few minutes ago, the last Energy Committee meeting, Elizabeth arranged for Todd Flowers to come in to talk about SMRs, small modular nuclear. And, you know, one question, it was a very, very dynamic discussion. And one of the questions that took us down a very, very kind of, you know, curious road, and we have to ask ourselves, is what right now, without data centers, before the data centers in Prince William, we were having trouble finding capacity in the grid for charging infrastructure. And that is not unique to us in Northern Virginia, or across the United States. We're talking to colleagues all over the United States, and they're having the same issues, which is a grid capacity issue. Because, you know, I mean, if you think about it, it's not unusual to have grid infrastructure that's what, 60, 70, sometimes 80 years old. So it's a problem of capacity, but right now I think that's going to become even a more acute question and issue. And without being kind of like a Debbie Downer, I kind of wonder what it's going to do to the renewable portfolio standards and those benchmarks under the VCEA, because Todd, if I remember correctly, Elizabeth, said that Prince William was adding on 2 gigs of demand with
Yes,
the data centers.
Thank you.
And those data centers are
That's-
going to come online way quicker. Yes.
one.
They're supposed to outstrip Loudoun County, like entirely.
Oh yeah, Loudoun County is 1.4 gigs.
But
This is
they're
way bigger.
supposed to add, Loudoun County's supposed to be adding 5 gigs in the next few years, and Prince William is supposed to add, they're ostensibly surpassing all of what Loudoun has and what Loudoun will have.
Do you know what the timeline is on that kind of expansion?
I don't remember.
Because I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but it seems like Elizabeth, I don't know, it was very, you know, perfect timing, because it seemed like every half day after that meeting of the Energy Committee, I was coming up against a new study or a new article about SMRs and what they
Yeah.
were talking about. And they're really saying that they're not going to really produce and perform to scale for probably another decade.
Yeah, the time doesn't really line up, but a lot of the tech companies, because of their own clean energy commitments, like their market preferences, they're willing to invest, even though they have to power them in the near term, probably with new fossil fuels, even on site. But the timeline for, you know, I don't see us having an SMR online anywhere in the country before 2030 for sure. And the data centers are coming online now, but anytime you read an article about where data centers are blowing up demand nationwide, Northern Virginia is the bleeding tip of the spear. This is where they all want to be. So there's going to continue to be intense pressure for additional power resources that will probably be outgunned, outpaced, and, you know, outpriced by fossil fuels before any type of clean energy resources can begin to meet that demand.
Well, and Todd even mentioned, he said, these data centers and Prince William is going to bring online 2 gigs of power at the same time electrification of buildings and transportation is imposing new demands. So to get back to the transportation angle, I have questions. I won't say concerns, but I have questions. I'm very much looking forward to the release of the Dominion's IRP in, I think it's October. Because I just have no concept of how are they going to handle this type of demand, and what does it mean about electrification of transportation? I'm not being suspicious or anything like that, of that, you know, I'm not an engineer for Dominion, so I just don't know what they're projecting on what schedule and rollout and how they're planning. And are they planning on just keeping up with everything, including the electrification of transportation as well as the data centers? Or are they backstopping certain things? I don't know.
I'm concerned too for the charging stations. A more immediate concern is the availability of transformers, which, I mean, they're already having to restrain some of those, which I don't fully understand what that means. I do understand that it's like a patch that's much less desirable than having a brand new transformer, but that's a nationwide problem as well. And that's facing us today. So they can't, in some parts of the country, they can't hook up new developments to the grid because they don't have the transformer to serve the development. And that's definitely a concern for chargers as well, especially if we're putting many chargers in at individual locations. So I'm assuming that Lonely Dot up in North Arlington is the Madison Center.
Yes.
Where I was pleased to see what looks like more than a dozen chargers in the first entire row of parking. But that many chargers almost certainly would have required a new transformer to serve that additional potential load capacity.
Believe it or not, I don't think it did.
Really?
No,
they're
because I think, the density up there, or the lack of density and the lack of businesses, you know, the demand there wasn't such a strain on that kind of section of the grid. But when you get into, you know, the Ballston corridor, the Roslyn corridor, the Clarendon corridor, the Pike, Crystal City, National Landing.
And it kind of depends, you know, what they have there already. You know, if they have, because my understanding is they don't really like to leave too much capacity on the transformers because they like to have it be exactly right sized. But I think the entire industry wasn't really planning on having there be a nationwide shortage for like 4 years.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a little bit because of the data centers. And then when you add on just AI is now breaking out like gangbusters, and it's a real energy hog in and of itself. So I'm just kind of wondering, okay, what does first of all, the resource portfolio look like? And I agree with you. I think the sad truth is there's going to probably be some kind of quote unquote vacation or some kind of accommodation, where I think the only way that they're going to be able to bring these data centers online without putting the rest of us into a permanent blackout is going to be if they're using fossil fuels. Otherwise, I don't see how they do it in the near term. And then when you've got AI on top of that, and you've got electrification of buildings and electrification of transportation, with transportation being the far more energy intensive over buildings, I'm kind of wondering, okay, is the resource portfolio going to change? And is the order of things that are going to get amplification under the grid going to, you know, is there going to be a pecking order there? I have no idea. It's a big question, though, that we're starting to talk about internally, because I think if we talk about a new greenhouse gas inventory and stuff like that, to be quite frank with you, I've asked Drew Stilson to put an optional task into the inventory that calls for scenario building specifically based on this.
Can I ask Demetra, I don't know if you know the answer to this or anyone here knows the answer to this, but I mean, there's such things as demand charges and right, like escalating cost per kilowatt hour based on the amount of energy that a consumer consumes. And I suspect at the moment, the State Corporation Commission doesn't permit Dominion to do this sort of thing, but it seems like, well, if the data center is the one that is quintupling the total energy consumption of everyone else in Northern Virginia, then they shouldn't be paying the same kilowatt hour rate as, you know, the Thai restaurant across the street.
I don't think they intend to. My understanding is that most of the tech companies are prepared to enter into PPAs for as much as like $150. If it's clean energy, that's clean firm generation.
Right, and
Which doesn't really exist.
Yeah. Maybe we should probably get back to.
Sorry.
I have a question about
It does bring into, and this is probably another discussion on another day, but I'm going to just put this out there right now without dragging everyone down into a deep conversation about it. You know, if you took us back a little over a year ago when Takis was the head of SIPC at the COG, and, you know, if you recall, in advance of him taking, you know, that tenure on the calendar basis of 2023, I think it was in November of 2022, there was that big event in Washington, D.C. With the National Car Show, and the COG had a big thing, and Takis had a very, very comprehensive and very aggressive portfolio of measures that he wanted to see done regionally throughout the COG region in order to help drive the market for EVs and really start to decarbonize transportation on a much more significant order. So at that point, there was a lot of aggression, and we were, you know, told to think, you know, focus very strongly on what is the role of government and what can we do now in order to be a part of that. So this whole kind of mapping out of the government facilities where we put charging infrastructure, and right now what we had planned was to increase it. It was either 400 or 700% the number of chargers that we had by the end of the fiscal year FY25, which would be July of next year. So, but now I'm starting to hear from the public, from other advisory commissions, from voices in the public. And I'm not saying that we're, you know, stopping, you know, until when we get direction, we follow that direction until we're told not to follow it. But it seems as though there's been a kind of rethinking of the EVSE, or the focus or the priority on it, and along with that, the investments. So I'm just curious, just to throw that out there, and you know, we can again speak on that later, but I don't know if there's been any rethinking or any change of course with C2E2 or the Energy Committee on that.
Well, my question is sort of the inverse of that, I guess, is my understanding is that staff is doing a great job of deploying chargers in various locations, libraries and community centers, particularly when the Madison ones went online last week. That was great. I got all excited, took a picture. But that was in like a prime parking location, and I don't know where the EV chargers are, like for example at Central Library, but I expect that the prime parking locations are being taken for these EV charging because they're closer to the transformer, which is probably closer to the building. So I'm just curious if staff or anybody on your end, Demetra, have gotten any pushback from members of the public, from anybody, about like taking up prime parking spots for arguably little used, EV, vehicles.
We haven't yet, Doug, but usually when we get taken to task on doing something, it's after we've done it. So I'm sure after those chargers go in, there'll probably be some complaints. I'm just noticing people, as part of the budget and the CIP budget, we've seen comments coming into the board, into the county manager, questioning the investment in, EVSC. Now, that set aside, I'm just going to say very quickly, we've baked the EVSE into at least 2 major grant applications. The COG, DOE evidently had funds left over from round 2 of the CFI. It called back the COG and said, we didn't award you on round 2, but you did have a highly competitive application. Can you just resubmit your application? And come back also with an updated application for round 3. So we're doing both of those things and working with COG on that. The other thing very quickly, because I know we're running out of time here, is looking at other alternative decarbonized forms of transportation. So this is just to let you know, and I'm probably not supposed to say this because I'll curse it, but we just recently submitted a very, very large EPA community change grant application. That included, because that grant focuses on low to moderate income and disadvantaged communities. Obviously, most of it is, is focused for communities along the pike. But we did build an EV car share pilot into that proposal. The DOE, we're waiting for the Department of Energy to give us their media kit so that we can formally launch the EECVG program, which is strictly just an e-bike rebate program. We're working with, they call it Eco Action on that. We also baked an expansion of that electric bike voucher program, rebate voucher program, also into the latest EPA project. So we've got a couple of other things there looking at car shares, car ride. Maybe we don't have to have people owning, I don't own a car here, but to have that as a possibility to start stimulating in neighborhoods, education, use, familiarity with EVs. Also, huh? Did somebody ask a question?
No.
Okay. And also start looking at micromobility as well and what we can do about that. So along in that community choice grant, we didn't just, expand the e-bike vouchers. We also put in what we call beachy boxes that we stole from the Barcelona model, which is to put secure storage, external secure storage for people who live in apartment buildings where storing an e-bike is impossible or difficult. So there are other things that we're looking at too. Okay.
Quick question. How did you define public chargers on this map? It's just like looking in my neighborhood. I think some of the chargers mapped either require pay to park or parking passes. So I'm wondering how like the public part is defined.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question. How we're defining what?
The public EV charging.
I think those are public facilities, so.
Those are public facilities. So it'll be, government community centers, libraries.
But not every dot here is a library or community center. We don't have that many libraries.
A lot of
community
those are
centers.
private.
Yeah.
A lot of
You're
those are.
talking about the black dots. The black dots are clusters of existing charging. And those charging, they call it public, but a majority of those, you're not going to be surprised, particularly along the corridors, are in buildings. They're in garages.
It's a little hard for us to see to distinguish the purple and black dots.
Yeah.
Red and black dots.
We probably need to keep moving. I do think probably something we want to discuss as a commission is how much the government, how much the county is involved in actual private development of EV chargers. Of, what's the balance between getting things started, helping people try to figure out what to do, and
Yep.
leaving it mostly to the private sector.
Yeah, because just so you know, right now the count, and we have analytics on this that Emily can share in the future, around 2% of all of our cars owned here in Arlington County are electric vehicles. The majority of the personal charging infrastructure, not surprisingly, is in single family homes and their garages. Okay, so these are the main goals, again, just very quickly, because we've gone through this before. Reduce reliance on single occupancy vehicle trips, support an array of EV charging options throughout the county. That support word is very important because it's not just us putting it on government facilities, but also trying to work with private developers and private commercial entities. And then, of course, to support the phased decarbonization of the county fleet, and subsumed in this is also the APS fleet. Next, please. You're going to have this, and again, if you want to have a further conversation about this, I'm more than happy to come back and discuss any of these in more detail. But here you're going to see the three main actions, the objectives, and the key initiatives under each of those. And then again, as I told you, within the next 2 months, you'll be able to see that tied into the 5-year action program.
On that one, how much did you really talk about relooking at the existing, especially transit system, and whether or not it's meeting the needs, and how that could be reimagined, which is a point that we've made several times in the last few months?
Joan, in the interest of time, I'm not going to be artful. I'm going to be blunt. We certainly work very closely with transportation and transit, but as you know, we can't drive that bus.
Yeah.
We encourage and we support them. So I think the transit strategic plan is kind of the main place to really kind of generate and incubate those ideas. And certainly we would, support transit and transportation and love to be involved in that as well.
Yeah, I do understand the master transportation plan writ large is going to be relooked at, and that, because the transit strategic plan did not really reimagine transit all that much. It just how it could make it better for particularly where you had high ridership to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
And there's the typical thing about expanding routes, really connecting origins and destinations, and then of course the head time, shortening the turnaround time. Sorry, Jen, go ahead.
I was on the 55 bus today. I was the only one on there until somebody else got on. So things we need to be thinking about.
Yeah.
But probably beyond what this study alone can do.
Demetra, you're at time. Do you want to go through these or the next steps?
No, can you go through, these are very, and again, more than happy to come back, go through. This is support for charging stations that you've heard about. This is more of the analytics. We're going to have a technical memorandum for people who are interested in kind of the methodology and algorithms that go into the siting. Third is, of course, these are benchmarks that the county has set that you might want to look at for the full conversion of its own fleet. And then next, Jenna, if you can go down. Okay, the budget proposals, so grant applications, which I talked to you about. We're looking at a right-of-way EV charging pilot. This is probably going to be in a couple of different areas where, for example, you have neighborhoods that have no garages and no driveways. So we're talking to Dominion. They did a Ballard type of pilot recently that didn't require its own meter to be tied into a light pole. So we're talking to them about that. This, of course, off-grid, the solar charge, and we've got those baked into a couple of grant applications as well. And then, of course, this public safety take-home pilot. This is looking at electrifying the sheriff's department, the police department, and having take-home vehicles, EV vehicles, and just having the charging infrastructure that actually would help us get around some of the load and grid capacity issues here. And then, of course, the ongoing fleet conversion. Next, please. Sorry. And then, of course, you'll see continue to share the CNTMP with stakeholders, this action program that I've been talking to you about. And then, of course, taking key actions that hopefully are, advanced and promoted by key stakeholders such as C2E2 and migrate those into the CEP roadmap for years 3 through 5. And I know we got kind of taken off, but I've made notes here. So I think probably definitely looking at being in contact with you about where we are and what's going on with the rate ordinance, getting a lit review and kind of ideas and more information behind our peers in the region and in Northern Virginia on what they've done recently with updates to there and how they came to those costs.
Rachel, I have a question about transitioning the county fleet of vehicles. Does this transition, would it look sort of like, we're not going to buy an internal combustion engine vehicle really ever again unless there's some compelling public safety reason? We've talked about that before, and not all of us believe that some of those reasons are as compelling as others, but is there also an effort to accelerate the turnover of vehicles, or is it just sort of on the regular schedule of when a vehicle?
It's on the regular schedule of when their useful life is up. And, I think when you get into the medium and certainly the heavy duty vehicles, they're also looking for the market to kind of mature a little bit in the heavy duty vehicles. It looks like medium duty vehicles are getting a little bit more diverse and a little bit more reliable. But no, I don't see the county, particularly in the current finance issues with the office inventory, et cetera. I don't see them getting rid of cars before their useful life. And to be honest with you, I think, what is it? It's something like 9 years for passenger vehicles. I got to tell you, in the county of Los Angeles, they had passenger sedans that they were using, and they were 30 years old. So having a 9-year turnaround cycle is pretty short.
Do you have a schedule, actually, the timeline of kind of when the anticipated decarbonization would take place? Based on vehicle replacement rates and maybe estimated when the technology is going to be ready for the heavier equipment?
I can tell you yes on the sedans and the passenger vehicles. Let me check with Chris Allison about how far he's gone in just kind of doing scenario building on the medium and the heavy. Joan?
Mm-hmm. Now, when will we get copies of the whole study?
Probably going to get copies of the whole study. Let me see. I would say by the end of July, by your July meeting. And you'll also have, along with that, all of the appendices, which are the technical memoranda. And hopefully a kind of like good working draft of the 5-year action program.
Anybody have any other questions? Turn to our next item, which is to look at the CIP. Demetra, if you had any kind of thoughts, if you had seen our letter or not on the CIP or things that we could include as we're discussing the letter, you can make that as large as possible, Jenna, so.
Yeah, I mean, Joan, I'm probably, if you have any questions of me, I'll try and answer them to the best of my ability. As far as having comments, I mean, you're the board's advisory commission. So, when you have comments, particularly on things like the budget,
Yeah, no, I
I
just,
basically sit on the sidelines and let C2E2, do its advisory role.
no, I just wanted to make sure that there might be things that we were overlooking. That if you had anything to add that we should know about what's in the CIP that we haven't already seen. Okay, well, then we can just turn to this. I hope everybody had a chance to look at it. Did anybody have any kind of general comments about the overall letter and points? And then we can go one by one through each paragraph.
We'd had some discussion, I think mostly in the energy committee, about the role for geothermal. And I think we had some conversation about maybe encouraging a pilot project for geothermal somewhere. A conversation about how maybe Lover Run would be appropriate for that. And I just wanted to follow up and let everybody know that Lover Run actually does have geothermal already, which I was not aware of. So
The county has actually good experience with geothermal. They've got several schools with geothermal.
yeah.
So it's just despite the fact of being very successful with putting in geothermal, every time they propose it, they come back and say it's too expensive.
And there was some conversation at the
Where there's not enough room for it.
yeah, in the briefing on the 11th, I think it was, one of the board members asked a question about geothermal and was given a similar answer that it really is only truly cost effective when it's accompanied with new builds. So,
And Elizabeth, just to add to that, because I was at that session, obviously, and I believe there's a secondary, if I recall it correctly, Adam Callway, it was Susan Cunningham who asked the question. And
Yes.
Adam Callway answered her, and he talked about costs and he talked about the footprint. That's why when you see it in places like Lover Run and you see it in schools because they're more of a campus type setting.
Yeah, well, I think, they need to be a bit more, because you don't need a lot of space for geothermal. And I don't think Fleet had as much room as a lot of the other schools. They can go deep as opposed to wide. I think it's probably a little easier to go wide, but they put geothermal in Manhattan. So it's not, and there's actually companies that will do it as a service. So I think there are options that could be considered. It's just they kind of think of, this is what I know about it, and therefore let's stop right here. So if we can, as we get down there, we see a point of where it might be worth putting in. I think we talked about the battery chargers. Maybe that's someplace data centers there.
The only place where it's really unviable is they're building this new housing apartment complex across the street. If they go down, they'll hit the metro.
Right, yeah. Although what I think is great is that district, or the bridge district in DC, is they want to tap into the sewer pipes for geothermal. I don't know what you call it. It's not quite geothermal.
Maybe water source.
Yeah, it's
Biothermal.
biothermal. Yeah, right.
Oh no, that's waste heat, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
In a sense.
No pun intended.
So if everybody wanted anything on the first paragraph, that's just kind of the general, are there anything that the letter misses that is worth highlighting? I mean, we want to give credit where credit's due when there's, a lot of money going in that are environmental issues. So, but I didn't know whether it was worth elaborating point on all of.
What does it mean investing in our natural resources?
Mostly it kind of invasive. They're put in a fund. A lot of that isn't really quite defined in terms of they do, like one year there's more money going into recreation facilities. And then the other year they put in about the same amount of money for natural resources. So a lot of it, I think they're looking, at least initially, is reforestation. And those types of issues that they are a little bit ill-defined, but it's kind of a pot of money that could be used to, improve the quality of our natural resources and actually recognizing natural resources as
So invasive removal is not done in a steady state, but just hit every now and then?
No, they actually have, and I think in the budget, they added more money for invasive removal. So they probably do better than some jurisdictions on that. So, but anybody that's walked in our parks know that this is a huge problem. So,
Yeah, completely.
Deer
Deer
overall.
management,
yeah, deer management.
that'll be a
That's
continual
great.
cost.
Right, yeah.
When it says invest in our natural resources, really like investing in our wild spaces.
Well, how wild are they really?
Yeah, yeah, but I think some of that should, because there, it does include a couple of urban parks down in the kind of Virginia Square, Boston area. So, those are areas that, they could be thinking of as little areas of natural resources, helping to reduce urban heat island impact. That. So I think they're probably taking a fairly broad definition of that, given that we're a very dense region. So we have to think more broadly about what we consider natural areas and access to nature, if you will, if you kind of take it within the context of a biophilic city.
Joan, if I can just add here, I think that we also have to get really, really creative and expansive. This isn't reinventing the wheel about green infrastructure, and treat it like it's infrastructure. Because just adding more trees to natural areas is not going to mitigate an urban heat island situation.
Yeah. Green roofs, county board seems to be really enthralled by microforests and things like that too, in some of our real dense areas.
And that was a comment that FNRC had, is including biophilia in every single project,
Right,
not
yeah.
just as an add-on, oh, it'd be nice.
I'd speak to, just be prepared that I speak to a lot of CAs where they don't want the microforest. I won't name names, but I had people, from a couple of CAs go on a tour to the one that we did for stormwater and Crossman Run, and I got an email that said, you may not put a microforest in our area.
Huh. Probably 10 others that said, please do.
No, actually, they didn't, because they're
That's what-
neighborhoods and they think that they look, kind of unkempt and
Oh, we just got to work on changing.
On this,
I'm
on
not
the-
defending it. I'm just saying what it is,
On this second paragraph here, I do want to point out that at that same meeting, it was made clear that the GHG tool that the decarb tool. Yeah, the decarb tool was the basis for a lot of the decisions, and that's not available to the public. It's not part of the SIP, but I think we could at least mention that's we understand that that's how they did some of the analysis, and maybe make it a little bit clearer so that somebody who didn't attend that meeting or doesn't have access to those tools can kind of see how the county's making decisions.
Well, yeah, but I don't know that we've quite understood how that decarb tool works
Well,
too. There is a systematic way of trying to assess.
So we asked for a publicly available inventory of all facilities, including energy use intensity with best practices, et cetera. Some of that is kind of.
all of that is on the website. It's not very interesting to read, but it's all part of the ECAP data that's on the website.
Well, we can, progress is being made using decarbonization tool.
We have to come back because remember, and I can't remember whether it was C2E2 or the Energy Committee, but we had technical difficulties that night and Steve just couldn't.
It would be nice to kind of get a walk.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know they discussed a little bit at the meeting why they went with electric boilers, which, kind of struck anybody that knows anything as being the word, not a great choice for, energy efficiency perspectives. So does that capture, Elizabeth?
Yeah. When do we plan to send this letter?
Tomorrow. And I'll be speaking tomorrow at the work session.
Good. Somewhere there was, I can't remember which paragraph, that I'd like to echo of the FNRC point of increasing the funds for land acquisition.
Yeah, I did stick, oh, I know, I did that when, yeah, can you go back? Let's go paragraph by paragraph. I did slip it in.
Yeah, no, I saw that. That was good, but the point, land's only gonna get more expensive, right?
Right, yeah.
Isn't it at the end of this next one, C2E2 views the projections for transition? I thought it was at the bottom of that paragraph.
It was the paragraph after that, I think. So, okay, so we're okay on the HVAC systems and that. Again, this keeps coming back to our point is, they should have a plan. They know what the facilities are when they're gonna be renovated and, where the opportunities are. And then
And I like
it's
the
just general.
protected bike lanes.
Yeah, no, that's the.
They're not safe, people
Yeah.
won't use them.
Yeah, that's a big, they do talk about, some targets, but they don't really ever trace a lot of these things back to key environmental targets and goals. For us, it's the decarbonization of county facilities and operations and getting rid of fossil fuels. But more broadly, they do have goals of, kind of the stormwater. Some of that's maybe probably best defined. But, they're spending a lot of money on bike lanes and pedestrian access, and that's great. But just to kind of take that one step to say, okay, now we're going to have X number of miles of protected bike lanes and how the bike lanes are connected, because a lot of them just tend to stop.
They end in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah,
Here I am.
I don't know how you capture that, but there's got a way of saying, and.
Well, you say connecting bike lanes.
Yeah, right, yeah. So yeah, so that's general, get transparency, we should know what's in them. Okay, so on to electric buses. I'm really tired of this topic. So again, any comments or thoughts or changes?
Hey, Joan, can I ask you a quick question? And you don't have to answer now, but anybody there, if you can send us, if you know of a jurisdiction that has a 1-to-1.
Yeah, I don't, again, most of the
let us
jurisdictions.
know, because
This is usually a 10 or 15-year process, and most of, some of the jurisdictions most jurisdictions, if any of them, have been doing it for 10 years.
John Doe told me Metro is doing it one.
Well, everybody planned, yeah.
I've looked and tried to get a ratio, and what seems to be, and everything I've looked at, is just the assumption is 1-to-1. So they haven't done an analysis of how many more, because it just seems common sense that you can run an electric bus to replace a diesel bus or a C&D bus.
Yeah, what I've seen is that, and some of these are studies going back with technology that's now 4 or 5 years old, is that based on this, X% of our routes can be covered by electric buses. That's good enough to get started. We'll figure it out. We know the technology is improving. We know there are different options in fleet management that can allow us to do that. So nobody is actually going in and saying, well, this is the ratio we've come up with. And we have to plan for that, because it's not a static and things are changing, and everybody else recognizes that. So, it's the county's made the decision.
No. Joan, we can talk about it later, but we did a very extensive regional lit review and then a very extensive national one. And we did not find, that's why I'm asking if anybody's got, because they're doing projections on replacement ratios. They're all doing it.
Yeah, but nobody's believing.
Doing it, and nobody that we're aware of is coming up with a 1-to-1. So if you've got them, please share them with us.
I know you kind of sharing with us that people are actually planning and projecting to buy more buses. based on a ratio that's higher than 1-to-1. Because I haven't, what I've seen, Metro's not doing that. Alexandria is not doing that. I've looked at Chicago, I've looked at New York. I mean, I think one finally came up and said, well, maybe 1% of the buses will have to add an extra buses or two. And these are, fleets of a couple hundred buses.
I did the same search. I found one jurisdiction in California that had long distances and a lot of hills. And
Yeah.
they had a 1 to something greater than 1 ratio, but that's
Yeah.
the only one I found
Yeah.
that calculated more than 1-to-1 ratio for replacement.
So,
Because
yeah,
Montgomery County, we had a discussion with them and a number of other jurisdictions that goes on quarterly. And then I'll get off this, but that meeting just came up a couple of weeks ago. And I asked everybody, because it's a super regional, it's up and down the Atlantic seaboard, if they were coming up with anything else. And the only jurisdiction that said it was Montgomery, and their people said, we came up with a 1-to-1 when we blended on a plan, on a scenario to blend the bus fleet, a DEB with FCEB. And I said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. So nobody else kind of piped up on the call.
but again, we don't even have a bus in service. So why do we need to be putting in $75 million for all sorts of infrastructure? And frankly, we've gone from 2-to-1 to 1.6-to-1 to now we're down to 1.3-to-1, and we still don't have a bus in service.
Well, the buses aren't here. It takes us at least 2 years to get them, Joan. But the other thing is the Dominion infrastructure, the price tag on that, if I remember correctly, is $28 million to Dominion.
Okay, well, anyway, let's get back to this. Anything, I'm gonna scroll up a little bit, just, are we okay with this first paragraph? And then the next paragraph really is, the 75 million for all this extra infrastructure is really way too premature. But it does indicate that there's money that could be spent on other things. And again, we've talked a lot, and we've made recommendations of, and it actually came up at the APS work session of, and this is where it gets really frustrating, is one of the school board members brought up about having ART take over some of the APS bus transportation for middle and high school students. And the county manager came back and said, well, we have to spend all this money on electrification and we can't do it. So, but there is a lot of interest on the school board and the county board of, really kind of what Susan called a moonshot. So again, kind of pointing out there may be money there. Plus money for other things that people are,
To Demetra's point, on the 75 million, do we know how much of that is just base required if you want to start to institute
they tried
infrastructure
to
for this?
separate it out. I mean, it's basically, well, they're actually adding more buses. So, even without a with anything, even with a 1-to-1 ratio, they're getting pretty close to capacity at the new bus facility. And then there's a smaller facility in the same area. So if they expand the fleet much further for whatever reason, they need it was 25 million or so for new land, 25 million to build a new facility. And then I think it was 25 million for the extra buses. It was the way that 75 million was calculated. And that money was, that was included in, enough of the data was included in their presentation on transportation so I think that, if what they were saying is right, and that they had separate lines or they would include separately the additional money that has to be continued to be spent to put in all the charging infrastructure as the bus fleet.
So what are we trying to say here? That that 75 is high and it should be redirected to other things?
Basically, it's not necessary because it's based on something we think certainly is way premature. And so we shouldn't be.
Joan, can I ask, and I apologize, I should have looked at it. That's over the 10-year CIP. Do you remember kind of what was the cadence of the flow over the 10 years?
I think some of it was fairly near term. Like purchasing. I mean, it wasn't like they were pushing these things off until, we were well into the way of making the transition. And again, but
Bless you.
Definitely not funding. It was a bunch loaded early years of that.
Interesting.
and
Yeah.
this is where I worked into we do have funds that, we should put a placeholder because we know we're going to want to spend money some of these things. And there's other things that people would like to see money dedicated right now. I mean, they change the CIP every 2 years when they review it. So it's a constantly moving target.
Maybe additional land acquisition.
Yeah.
Which they already have some.
Okay, yeah. Right. Right, and then the resiliency hub. And that's, I mean, it's worth doing, whether that's what the Climate Action Fund should be for, raises a bit of a question.
In that paragraph, I might suggest middle of the paragraph where we say community resiliency can best be achieved by using these funds for programs, ... I think our main point here is that the Climate Action Fund should be used for actual reductions in greenhouse gases, not adaptation or
Okay.
resiliency. So maybe
Why don't just a sentence on that before it starts, broad community resilience, so the Climate Action Fund should be dedicated to projects that reduce
Do you
greenhouse
want
gas.
to eliminate adaptation, or do you want to say emphasize mitigation, but also include adaptation? Well,
Yeah.
close to that, right?
Yeah,
To some degree, it's education too, right?
Yeah, and the other is 96% of our carbon emissions is outside of what the county does. And, and we're, this is complex for people to figure out what to do. I mean, I think even for some of us, when we try to do it, it gets head scratching pretty quickly. So, for the average resident.
Connect from Washington Gas.
Yeah,
It's
so,
not easy.
so it's that kind of, pushing for really steps that really help people understand what they need to do and how they can do it and how they can benefit and where the money is.
And so what other sources of funding would be envisioned here
Or funding
for the resiliency hub? Because we're recommending that the
Yeah.
county seek other sources. I mean, is this still
Probably
public funds?
probably federal or, the federal funds, state funds are probably out there, but just look within the other capital funds that they might have. But it's just that, the capital Climate Action Fund was set up. At least our thought is to really help reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
So it could be other Arlington funding, not.
Other Arlington funding or other sources of funding.
But it's not direct.
Yeah.
Can I just split a hair on that one sentence that starts off with broad community resiliency? It kind of says broad community resiliency can be best achieved by mitigation, because everything that you talk about in the rest of that sentence is mitigation, and it's conflating resiliency with mitigation.
Yeah, and the intent of my comment was to replace at least the first half of that sentence. So I guess
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you have to combine those two sentences to say the climate action fund should be dedicated to reducing greenhouse gases
By using these funds.
by using these funds for programs that assist, get rid of broad community use.
Okay, yeah.
Because the hub is a fine way to address community resiliency. It's just not an excellent use of dollars that are supposed to be.
Yeah, and it's important for emergencies, and most community resiliency hubs actually tend to play a big role in community resilience broadly, not just in emergencies. My thinking was, and it's hard to phrase it consistently, is if you have highly energy efficient homes, if you've got some degree of solar and battery storage, and if that's kind of the norm across the community, when you have these events, your house will stay cooler, it'll stay warmer longer, even the power is out, or you've got a little bit of backup. So, there is a resiliency element of the mitigation strategy, but it's mainly the mitigation. So I'm fine with, that's fine. And again, gets really complicated to try to explain, so.
Got something that's really simple to explain. So the second sentence of this paragraph, the one after the bolded, begins, this project will not advance Arlington's goal of reducing GHGs, not for.
Okay. Okay.
That in the sentence we were just in should really be a 2.
And on this one, on the fossil generator. I think this was where maybe picking up the phone and geothermal. It'd be something that more broadly, or looking more broadly at community facilities. We should be considering geothermal as an additional resiliency option. Again, you're
For retrofitting.
for retrofitting, yeah.
Maybe there's something like how do the silver co-op where multiple families get together. Maybe they had multiple buildings, they get together.
Yeah, there's
There's that out for geothermal.
Yeah, there's actually a neighborhood in Framingham, Massachusetts, where the utility is actually replacing the gas lines with geothermal. So, it's a publicly owned utility, so they're a little less resistant. So,
Yeah.
Those are my people.
So you could maybe a placeholder for a sentence there on geothermal in facilities. And I can do a quick, but it just kind of put it from the broader perspective. Geothermal should be, considered when renovating or building new facilities as an additional element of resiliency.
Can I ask a basic question? Is there any precedent in other public buildings for battery storage?
Not all that much, but I think that's, again, we need to be looking towards the future. And I did look at something on resiliency hubs. There's a organization that really kind of defines what they are. And they had actually a nice table, and they actually did suggest that if you could do it, is the battery storage has a lot more flexibility. It's not just providing power when you lose it. It also helps stabilize grids and things like that. So
I also think it's relevant that we're still in the implementation phase of the IRA tax incentives that are newly available for standalone storage that could reduce the cost of these by 30, 40, 50%. So, where it may not have been cost effective to consider battery storage as a backup system in prior years, we're rapidly approaching a moment where it could
it's keep dropping. Yeah.
No, that's great. I didn't mean to imply that we shouldn't look at it because we
Yeah.
haven't done it. We should obviously look to the future,
Yeah.
but more, like, is there a financial model that looks at these things and says, hey, you know what? Now this works where it didn't work before. Similar to your point about geothermal, where somebody might write it off immediately and say, well, it hasn't worked before, or it hasn't worked
Yeah.
in the two circumstances I've looked at it, so it just doesn't
Yeah.
work.
And
There's an in-route platform called RIOT, energy optimization model, and it can, I mean, they do this kind of modeling.
Yeah. increasingly, they're talking about virtual power plants. And it's these battery storage that become part of the virtual power plant that the, Dominion can tap into as they need it to,
He needs to one day.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's.
All these data centers.
Yeah, they're talking about utility scale.
Okay,
Joan, are you talking about the USDN model on resiliency hubs?
mhm.
It's great. Yeah, we use that also for
It's really excellent. Are you
for
part of
grant
it?
development. Yeah. Oh God, I've been part of the USDN for, I think, since they first started.
Okay. Mark, if you want to talk to the next one. Anything?
Well, yeah, this is the stormwater piece. So the first part of it is really just noting the basic building blocks of the program that have been established over the last several years. Kind of an attaboy. It's good. And we have results from it. And then I wanted to kind of go directly to focusing on the analysis that the county is doing for Spout Run and Lumber Run, which are really the two watersheds that are the biggest projects of the original critical watershed list. The longest runs, and a lot of work has been done in terms of analysis. But I wanted to get the focus back on having the staff analysis on feasibility of the options as the centerpiece, because particularly for Lumber Run, there's been a lot of politics recently where folks in some of the communities are pushing back on whatever you do, don't put a detention vault in my park. And so there's some of that going on. And I was trying to emphasize that what we'd like to see is let the analysis that the staff routinely does in these projects speak for what is the best option for the county and for these particular watersheds. And it really isn't much more than that, just to get back to the facts,
Right, yeah.
as opposed to people getting upset about, don't touch my park. And so that's what that's about. And then the last point was just a note that, and this goes back to some things I think you had in your original drafted letter and is still in there, which is we sometimes have these very ambitious goals. In the case of stormwater, we have the county has articulated this idea of a minimum 10-year storm protection with the goal of getting to 100-year storm protection if we're possible. And you would be using perhaps overland relief to get there. But there is this goal statement.
Yeah.
And I wanted to at least suggest that the county think about some ways in which it can better communicate to the public about how, when they see some project in their neighborhood and they have this notion perhaps of a 10-year storm and a 100-year storm, whatever that level of protection means, I think it's not always the case that you always get 100-year storm protection, even if you put in a detention pool. So I think it would behoove the county to make sure you can kind of explain when a project is completed, what it contributed. So people know, and they don't overthink it or think it's doing something it can't achieve. At the same time, be realistic about how much better that protection is.
Yeah.
Just as a realistic way of communicating. I learned this in my days at EPA. We tended to overstate things about what we had achieved, and people come back and say, you really didn't do that.
Well, that brings back to the point, is there monitoring before and after one of these stream projects to see, did you have the result that you projected.
Right.
Because a lot of the modeling, it's based on modeling. It's not
Right.
based on actual measurements.
Yeah, and
Erosion reduction and everything else.
And I think there are ways to do that. And I
Mhm.
think at times the county the staff has done a good job explaining that, being very clear that we have done this much and we haven't done that much. And that my experience in EPA was, you have to do that right. Because if you don't, the public doesn't trust you. And you gotta be very clear what you achieved.
Transparent, here's the data.
Haven't yet achieved.
Here's what it was before, and here's how we were expecting it to be, and then,
Yes,
and here's why it may not go as far as, you know, we can't, we can't deal with every event. There's something.
that's right.
And then, they often have very little room to actually work with on some of these things.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's my always point is always, what's the impact? So what are you getting out of all this money that we're spending? And that's just broadly.
And is there the opportunity to add something in that last paragraph about, not leaving it all to the streams? I know we have a new utility now, but we're expecting a lot out of our streams to absorb all this runoff. Right, and we need to capture more of it before it gets to our streams. So
Well, in theory, when it works, and I think it does work most of the time, detention vaults, if they're operating the way they should help them significantly. Because basically what you're doing is holding the water and then letting it go later on a more even flow. So you're not going to get the same level of
DC
scour.
Clean Waters Program,
What's that?
the DC tunnels that hold the rainwater before introducing it slowly to
Yeah.
floodplain.
While protecting the stream, or maybe after watersheds, kind of a phrase of something like, while protecting, preventing additional erosion from stream beds, or well,
I'm saying capture the stormwater before it gets to our streams, however we're
Yeah,
all
we
doing
could-
our
could-
bed, cutting trees, and there's
Yeah.
it's against that.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
The,
I mean,
the infrastructure program too for the capital maintenance, the outfalls.
Yeah.
That's really, I won't say it's the only, but it is a major cause. The outfalls just, are in desperate need of repair and they just act like fire hoses.
Yes.
Just
Yeah,
shooting
exactly.
large volumes of water into streams and they cause so much erosion in a very quick period of time. So the outfall program is really important as
Yeah,
well.
if you're not capturing enough of the water upstream before it gets to those outfalls, then you're just gonna, whatever money.
All
is
along
down
the way,
there.
we need to be capturing.
Yeah.
Like the streams is the last.
but I guess, Demetra, those, that capturing the storm wave before it gets to the streams,
Yep.
Okay, any other thoughts?
Why does it say delete?
Oh, just that will preventing
we,
additional.
we need to tinker with the language.
Yeah.
But we don't have to do that.
It's a great point.
That's sure that people facing serious flooding risk in these waterheads. Maybe it's not including damage to streams or something. Serious flooding risks include some of the damage to stream bed. That's part of the flooding risk.
Okay, so maybe something like capturing stormwater before it gets to it. Before it
Well, maybe it
contributes
could
to
just be including damage to our streams.
including damage to our streams.
We should say something about capturing.
I said including capturing
It should be a
stormwater.
separate sentence.
I think you didn't have to say
Sure.
more about what the remedy is.
Well, there are multiple remedies from small scale at the individual homeowner letter to level to a
Yeah.
bigger.
I'll put the order that would do capturing stormwater before it does damage to the streams.
Serve the people facing serious flooding risks.
Yeah, good words.
I
Yeah.
think you want a different, additional phrase there. Best serve the people facing serious flooding risk in their homes. There. And protecting our streams. From further erosion and other damage. You're basically talking about erosion.
By doing that.
Right. I mean,
We're tinkering with our streams quite a bit, and that's partially where we're getting pushback. But if we capture some of the stormwater before it blows out our streams, then it's such drastic projects.
see, the thing with detention, it doesn't truly capture it. It delays
Yeah, it slows it down.
it. It slows it down,
Right.
which helps with
Well, if it can-
scouring, but.
Yeah.
I don't
It
know.
may be part of the solution.
Yeah, sure.
So
I don't think we have quite. But we can,
as long as we agree on
We
the
can do
basic
that like
concept
tomorrow.
here, yeah.
I don't understand what you mean.
Other changes.
Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. All right, now onto the APS curriculum letter. Doug, you want to lead on that?
Sure. So this letter kind of grew out of discussion we had at the Energy Committee about, basically it's about outreach. You know, one of the main things that felt like raise community awareness, of climate change. That's a prerequisite for changing the way we operate. So one of the ways to have better outreach is to think about the children who are going to be suffering through the brunt of climate change as their lives. So the APS curriculum was something that we thought we ought to look at. So Kip Malinowski, who some of you may know, is a teacher, science teacher at Jefferson Middle School. He went through the Virginia Standards of Learning and the Arlington curriculum documents looking for references to climate change. And we discussed those at an Energy Committee meeting. And there were very few references to climate change in either of those foundational documents for APS students. Surprising to me. So we thought it would be good for C2E2 to send a letter. And of course, we can't really send it directly to the county board. We have to send it, we have to send it to county board. We can't really send it to APS. But we can CC the school board members and the superintendent. And so we just point out that there's not much in the standard instructional guidelines about climate change. There needs to be a lot more. Children and their future, and they need to learn this stuff and know this stuff, and they shouldn't end up being like, oh, when they're 18, oh, there's climate change. Oh, I had no idea. So we have some specific ideas about how climate change can be integrated into the curriculum. Try not to go too granular. Try not to be telling APS, exactly how they should be teaching this stuff, but some general parameters and guidelines. So I think it's a good letter. I think it's a little different than what C2E2 has usually been doing. But I think it's a really good way to get the word out to the community, to the school administrators, that they really need to be having some climate change instruction. Otherwise, it's just a huge gap in the students' education.
Is there a sense that this varies across the county? Because like my kids go to Discovery and like there's a compost bin and it's a net zero school and there's geothermal and they know all about it. So
Well, I'm gonna push back respectfully.
for their age, I mean, kindergarten and
Yeah,
third grade. So,
but composting and recycling, that's not climate change.
well, it's mitigants, right? I mean, it's,
Is it, are the kids taught that, if you know, are they taught that like humans are burning fossil fuels, which make a blanket in the atmosphere?
no,
that traps
I
heat?
don't know. I don't think so. But I tell you what, they know a lot more about improving the environment than I did when I went through it.
Well,
I get, but my point was really more, is it uneven across
It
the
is very
county?
uneven.
Meaning,
Yeah, I'm sure that most schools do not have a compost bin, for example.
Yeah.
There's
We
a
had-
lot of food waste.
The tip was very, very useful. See, I went to scrub the curriculum, came back with the report on, here are the points where actually it gets introduced. And unfortunately, it's rather limited and generally is loaded in at the end of the school year too. So the kids aren't even paying attention, just right.
After SOLs,
Yeah,
nothing
it's-
happens. And if it's not in the SOLs, it doesn't get taught.
So anyway, so there was clearly a need there, based on what was a pretty good dig that Kip did to the materials he has access to.
If this is, but could we recommend a C2E2 internship for one or two high school or what?
We actually do have a seat. We could actually, if somebody wanted to, a high school student wanted to be on the commission. There is, there,
I mean, there's.
I had one query and she never followed through.
This is the first
Yeah.
time I've ever heard.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a kid in schools yet. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but I have no idea how known that is throughout schools. I don't.
Not terribly. I mean, they're, obviously nobody knows about it because even the commission doesn't know about it.
Well, can we just add this then, that into here, that like we would want them to publicize?
Yeah, so respectfully,
Okay.
I personally believe that most letters should be like focused,
Okay.
okay? And so, arguably, C2E2 is getting outside its lane to be going telling APS how they should do their job. And so, hopefully this will be well received. So this is sort of like a two-step thing. So this letter was focused on curriculum. And then we also have Scott Sklar, who some of you may know, who's meeting with operational people, like the buses and HVAC systems and water heating and those sorts of things, the more operational things. And it might be that once we zero in on those issues a little bit, that there could be another separate letter on the operational side of APS.
There is like a commission, a school board commission focused on curriculum.
Is that okay? Maybe they should get CC'd with this thing.
Yeah, and that actually, so.
There's also a sustainability commission.
Well, that's what, I guess that's what it's called, right?
Yeah, there's a sustainability commission, which mostly talks about curriculum, and
Right.
I think they worked hard to get liaisons on sustainability for each of the schools. But they haven't, actually what they haven't really focused much on, I think I think they're doing a little more now, is actually the operations itself in the buildings.
When I was chairing the board, we did outreach to them. Chairing the energy committee. We did outreach to them. I sat in on a couple of the sustainability commissions meetings, and it was 100% about curriculum.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
CC Tanner. I would suggest to CC Tanner, and I've been in touch with him about how Eric can basically get in touch with those sustainability liaisons throughout the schools, and they'll be not this, in the coming fall, we'll be meeting in October for their kind of final layout of curricula, and then what is an AIR initiative that we can kind of show an activity of either energy resources or show, depending on the grade level that we get, something that they would be able to learn more about energy consumption in the county or greenhouse gas emissions, or it could be a very basic level of defining, energy terms, but, so that's just something that we're working on for, the fall. But I would say, Tanner, we'll CC it to him too. Okay.
Oh, that's the first name. Okay. Well, the CC list, needs work and needs to have things added to it. So that we're not quite fully baked on the CC list. And I don't see any problem with the widest possible distribution.
One idea is instead of creating a separate unit, the teacher would have to work into their already full curriculum, kind of integrate it. I mean, maybe not in every unit they're doing, but figure out ways of integrating climate change into units they're already doing. Like, I
Yes,
think
that's one of the.
sixth grade, they learned about the Chesapeake Bay, and that could be an opportunity to learn how it's climate affecting.
Yeah, so that's the large bullet. I think what you're talking about.
Doug, I'll just say that I agree with you. And I base this on the fact that our son just graduated from APS. He went to Discovery and yeah, wow, we did it. He went to Discovery and I thought it was brilliant. This was when Discovery was first opened and, you've got these signs, like LEDs explaining what LEDs are and how efficient they are. It's all really great. My impression, and this was validated in a conversation with my son, is it's still sort of 1990s thinking. Like, oh, let's recycle. I think we all know that recycling, like all that plastic you throw away is going to get burned. Okay. So, and unfortunately he stuck with me. So, the myth buster, he did not get a great education in climate change, despite the fact that he did, the AP, everything from AP by all the AP science courses and stuff. And it's antiquated, and it's reflected, I think, in those high school students who came here, and our son was actually working with them, and they go around and they pick up trash. Well, that's great. I think picking up trash is wonderful, but it's not dealing with climate change.
And it's the old thinking of it's our responsibility.
But, yeah,
Clean up the
exactly.
mess
So
that
I just
somebody else made.
I validated it with an 18-year-old who said, yeah, it's not good enough.
Thank you.
And the high school kids that came here were also asking for more.
I mean, I think it would be amazing if they were, sort of educated, it was integrated into all the curricula, and they were motivated actors. That would change the dynamic. I mean, I'm all for clothing swaps and trash pickup, but that's not going to resonate with leaders. And we can mobilize them as a constituency. They could be very powerful.
Yeah.
They have the most to lose
Mhm.
in the future.
So, yeah, thank you.
It's well, part of can't burn any more fossil fuels, not yet. So any other comments or thoughts on these bullet, we had Rob added in an extra.
So, Jeff and I put this letter together and Cindy approved it, and then there were suggestions for a couple other additional bullet points. And I'll just make some comments on those suggested additional bullet points. I'm generally okay with each of them. We'll start with the first one, which came at the beginning. And this one I'm fine with, but I would just soften the language just a little bit. There's a phrase in there that says, we must firmly establish that. And I would just suggest replacing that with student instruction should be clear that. Because this is all about instruction of students.
I was just listening to something on the radio segment and, the whole individual actions and calculate your carbon footprint. That's just the big fossil fuel companies trying to skirt that responsibility. So
that's the second bullet.
we shouldn't waste time with picking up trash and clothing swaps. You're right. We need to get the crux of the point.
Bullet point here,
Well, it actually means that students should expect adults to do the right thing, but.
And then the other bullet point that it was suggested be added is currently at the very end of the bullet points. And there's an argument to be made. So this bullet point, the way it's written, is mostly talking about operations. And as we said, I was trying to keep this just focused on curriculum and then have operations as whole separate area where we would be advocating the APS for changes to be made, specifically these changes listed here. So overall, on balance, I would say leave this out because it's confusing. It gets outside the strictly the curriculum aspect of it. And I like short letters rather than long letters and keep things focused and something people just likely to read the whole thing rather than say, oh, too long on it.
Although at Oberlin, they did a competition. They had like a building readout where you could see how much water they're using, how much electricity they're using. They had a competition between dorms and they went crazy. They wanted that pizza party at the end to say like, I mean, students were not showering. I mean, it was like, so getting, pitting elementary schools against each other who can save the most energy kind of thing. That could be a really good learning experience. So that goes into operations.
Instead of getting rid of the operations bullets by saying integrating, improving, building operations and impacts with curriculum. Could be
I think what we're getting at is like real life examples, case studies involved in curriculum.
well, and more than case studies that you're
Well, it's-
studying, but like actually, it's a combination of learning the case study and then actually doing something to change that.
Well, and that is that their whole learning environment, the building that they're in, the land that the playground, the areas that they're outside in, all becomes part of that learning environment. Which means that the county first has to have a policy on their facilities and operations that, match that and kind of put that as part.
Maybe you could just say like to the extent practical, use the facility in the building as a living laboratory to reinforce
good, yeah.
instruction on climate change.
If we're gonna have something like that, I think it would fit better as move it up 2 bullets, so it comes after the bullet about subject of climate change and it should be integrated in the entire academic curriculum. And then this bullet, so the last 2 little short bullets are still at the end because they're more like a wrap up.
So,
So right before the teaching and really want to get.
yeah.
How much say does was the APS have in the curriculum relative to Richmond here? Like what?
Well, they have to teach to the SOLs.
Right.
And I don't know that there's much of any of this integrated into the SOLs. I think there was legislation this year that didn't make it, that was trying to get more climate education. But so, my experience, which is ages ago, was they taught to the SOLs, and I suspect there's still a lot of that.
They're not prohibited, but they're gonna be
No.
measured against SOL education.
Yeah.
So they're in, right.
They spend,
Well, but that's why.
after spring break, that's all they do is
Yes.
Oh, right.
prep for it.
My wife teaches 3rd grade, so I mean, it's.
Well, it gets worse.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, let's get a general sense of the language that we want.
Math.
Rob, can you remember what you said?
Yeah, sure. Climate change instructions should be reinforced by using APS facility.
Good.
Okay, yeah.
Could be reinforced.
Yeah.
By using APS facilities, school.
As a living laboratory.
I mean, that's getting at the mitigation to reduce emissions, but I added that first bullet because I really wanted to get to the climate science of, instructing on what's actually happening in the atmosphere and learning that, I mean, and then we can say, okay, well, we're reinforcing how we can reduce emissions, using the schools, but the focus, I think, of the letter should really be on what is climate change, why is it important, what's happening.
Yeah.
That's why I started. Got to get our foot in the door before we start micromanaging.
Yeah. And to understand why they're trying to mitigate, what am I mitigating, right? Why do I care about the HVAC?
So we just take out, so you have that one sentence and then we can take out the rest of it.
Yeah, I'm open. I didn't add the rest of that. I mean, I'm open to piece of that. I don't feel strongly.
Maybe work just a little bit in it, but it needs a lot more short.
But it does kind of belong together because by doing all these things and
Yeah, just give us some
integrating the
idea.
building itself into the
Mhm.
construction.
Yeah.
Because just putting a sticker, this is a
Put brackets in there.
energy efficient light bulb is probably not enough.
We'll just kind of cut it back a little bit on. And just, just give a few examples of how they can integrate. And that kind of gets at the other issue of pushing them harder to do the same thing we want the county to do in county facilities, is decarbonize as fast as possible. And don't build new buildings with gas in it. Yeah. Okay, anything else?
I have one sort of process question, thought. It's not part of our normal agenda to be advising APS, and we're not here, but we have another letter coming. Is it a good idea to just have another letter pop up and people wonder what's going on, or should we signal that there's, we're not going to follow up with another letter?
So,
I'm not sure. I'm just.
When is that letter coming? Tomorrow or next year?
no,
I think
we're going to focus
probably
on operations. That would be a subsequent thing in a couple of
Yeah.
months. I kind of like to get the curriculum thing going over the summer.
Yeah.
So that maybe, hopefully, when fall starts, there's a little bit more of a new approach, assuming the superintendent is willing to send out the instruction. And Kip Malinowski did say that there was a office hours for the superintendent, where he invited people in schools to come in and give their views on whatever. And he said the superintendent himself raised something about climate change in that meeting. So Kip was quite encouraged by that. To think that maybe our letter is going to fall on fertile soil.
And I'm not trying to delay this letter. I definitely think this should go. I'm not trying to expand the letter. I didn't know if we ought to be mentioning, oh, by the way, we're going to send you in a few months something else, or you think it just.
Not this letter. I like the idea of signaling and giving a heads up, but I think you have the verbal, you can give that verbally and say, hey, we're going to letter too. So
And it might muddy the waters.
We don't block
Yeah,
sign.
and I can just say is that the school board last week just adopted a new strategic plan. They did include for the first time a objective on sustainability. And they did set targets. Some of them were silly, like we're going to put 9 EV buses when they've already got 8 on order by 2030. But others was 100% renewable electricity and substantial greenhouse gas reductions. And then the other thing is actually develop a climate action plan. So the thinking in the process is there.
That's also a great pathway in to say, here's why we're writing this letter. We know the APS, it's the strategic plan, and we'd like to.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm raising it has nothing to do with substance, a lot to do with little p politics and terms of commissions. So I want to make sure nobody thinks we're overstepping what we're doing. We come up with another letter later. So, but probably talking to somebody's better than actually putting a letter. So.
Any other changes? Motion to approve? Moved. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any objections? Okay, it is passed. We have to approve the April and May summary, and as I seem to recall at our last meeting, it was expecting everybody to review it, so we can just quickly have a vote on this. April?
Before we get too far into this, I was gonna ask, can I be recorded as abstention on the SIP letter? My husband's a county employee and worked on that plan, so I'd just like to
Okay,
be notated as abstaining.
Minutes.
okay.
Is that April or May?
No, the one we just approved
Oh, sure.
Sorry, that's right now, sorry.
right now.
Oh, CIP, CIP, I'm sorry. I was. No, that's fine.
So if you just make sure that's in the minutes. Okay. Motion to approve for the April and May
April
summers.
and May both together. Is it?
What?
I actually had a note in May. There was a guest speaker also named Elizabeth. She was referred to interchangeably as Liz. Elizabeth. I would ask that last name be added.
Okay. Um,
And there's
Mitra, are you on?
places.
Server?
Yes.
Server.
Yes, okay. If you just want to
I
review
think
it
it's-
before you post
It
them.
started more
Yeah,
clearly
that's
when
fine.
she was referred to as Liz. But then later on, it
Elizabeth.
switched to Elizabeth.
Okay.
It is a,
Caught my eye. I was like, I don't remember knowing much about that. It's like
The whole meeting.
much more knowledgeable than me.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an example.
For April, it says I was absent and I was here.
Sorry about that.
You're quiet. The record says.
I was absent.
Who was absent? That's here now.
Jonathan.
No, I'm saying I was absent.
Oh, okay.
It's probably late since we usually.
Says you were absent.
I'm gonna see if I am.
Anybody got any other changes for either April or May?
I'm trying to figure out if I was here. Sure, when the roll call was taken.
Yeah. That's right.
I had it on my calendar. I was probably here.
I think you're here. It's during the roll call.
We're talking about April. Am I?
This is, yeah, for May or April?
I think I was here in April.
Okay.
Do you remember the high school kids presenting?
Yeah. Actually, I did come in quite late to that meeting, but I did catch high school. So.
So, I think my appointment was actually the end of April. So
So you,
I was present at the April 15 meeting, but not a member of the committee yet on that virtual. You see where it says members virtual? I think I was technically a guest. I just looked at the email I got from the county. It was April 24th, so. I was enthusiastically ahead of my time.
Oh, I was there. I think it was the day before. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Okay. All right, rapidly go through updates since we're already at time. Just let people know, County Board did pass the solid waste master plan, zero waste plan at their last meeting. Really didn't change it much, but what did happen, they put in a resolution where the original draft was a lot of whereas, then we adopt this resolution, or we drop this plan. They actually beefed up the resolution to actually make specific mention to climate and environmental impacts and emphasize the importance of reduction and reuse over even recycling. And they put in something on construction construction and demolition debris as something that they want the county to continue to work on. So a lot of the key points that we had that we were critical at least got in the resolution. So it's kind of a starting point of, and plus that they have to review the zero waste plan every 5 years instead of letting it sit around for 20 years and become obsolete. So that at least is, progress in the right direction and getting the points. And the county board was actually pretty receptive on the points that we made, as well as other environmental groups. Doug, anything else from the Energy Committee?
Nothing.
Okay, you want to talk briefly, Michaela, about the deer management plan?
I guess I will learn more on Thursday when the FNRC is briefed, but they have a suggestion, I guess, of moving forward with deer management, and it's primarily culling. Contractor suggested sterilization, but that's not going to work. So
I reviewed the latest video and I took the survey this afternoon.
yeah,
I enthusiastically support sharpshooters. I will bring them coffee.
right. I think everyone should go in and because they're counting the number of people for and against, and that made it into the presentation.
Yeah, which has been a fairly controversial issue.
Yeah.
Where do you go to vote for coffee for deer?
Gotta get them authorized, then we'll worry.
Yeah.
No, I want to make sure they get authorized so I buy coffee.
So do you want to circulate?
Yeah, I
link
can-
to
And
the
send the link out.
video, and I had to watch the entire video before I could go to say I support the shooting.
Yes, you do.
So just a warning. So it was like.
It's not that
8
long
minutes.
ago.
It's like,
No.
No.
but it's good stuff. It's,
No.
I thought there was a whole lot more than 250 deer in our.
What?
Like I say, they were not counting federal land.
I got
They weren't
200
counting
deer in
federal
my
land, and
backyard.
that's a minimum because there's just, because they said there were some in parts of Cherrydale where we don't.
I had one in my front yard 2 weeks ago. I was not on their count list, so
They live in my window. They want to eat my houseplants.
they're eating my plums up my plum tree.
Yeah.
They include the black bear?
The black bear is not part of this. It was just transitory. Found on ring cameras and such, but I'll have more
Yeah.
specifics after Thursday. So the FNRC is gonna write a letter in support. So we
Yeah.
wanna just
Mhm. Yeah,
move on with it. I don't know, scheduling, they need comments by July, so.
Yeah, I think they're gonna present it to the county board in July. I think the thing is, what they say is for the culling, they need to pass an ordinance. So when you do an ordinance, there's always the request to advertise that the county board approves first. So if anything, and I'm trying to get more details, I suspect maybe the request to advertise will be put in July, and then the actual vote would be in September. So if we have a letter next month, we're probably in good shape. And of course, people can always go and speak. And again,
Or,
letting
yeah,
people
we'll
know.
circulate
do
the
the survey.
comment form.
Yeah.
Commissioners can individually
Such a
go in.
thing as charismatic megafauna, and these are definitely charismatic megavermin. So,
Yes.
So Does anybody have anything else to say?
Donate it to the, yeah. Although there's a complication.
Sorry, we're talking about the need for the.
Yeah.
I think usually they do, although they have to test it down.
Well, that's the problem, because we started getting positives for practice.
And that's
That's something that you need to consider. I don't know what Virginia rules are.
I think it has to be tested.
But we test each and every animal. And if we get one hit, it's all gonna be.
They all do.
So I don't know, but they just need to plan for that, put that in, so.
Yeah.
It's like scrapie for deer, prion disease. Remember in Britain when they all got sick, that eating.
mad cow.
Mad cow disease.
Scrapie is the sheep, but mad cow is the cow.
So anybody got any other announcements? All righty. I think that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
And also